Let's kick it off. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining this quarter's Crimes and Cocktails. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whatever time zone you're in. Glad to have you here. So, start, I guess, by introducing ourselves. I'm Caleb Hansen. I'm the Director of Enterprise Accounts here at Signifyd. I've been here for about 3.5 years. In my role, I get to work with some of the largest merchants in the world, everyone from brick and click retailers to pure e-commerce companies, marketplaces, kind of the whole gamut of online commerce. In those conversations that I have with those merchants, I get to hear how everyone's thinking about fraud and abuse. I get to hear about the kind of the problems they're facing, where they're struggling with solving some of those problems, both in terms of internal and external factors. And it provides a really interesting macro perspective. So I kind of have this fire tower that I get to look out over the world of e-commerce from. My counterpart here today is Vito, a buddy of mine. He's a key member of our risk intelligence team, and Vito lives that reality at a different level. I guess if I'm in the fire tower, Vito is fighting the fires. Vito, you want to introduce yourself? Say hi.
Thank you, Caleb. First off, thanks to y'all for coming out. It's great to be around all of you to have this great conversation. I'm Vito Petrozelli. I've been with Signifyd for the last 3 years. As Caleb mentioned, I'm blessed to kind of be on the front lines here and see all sorts of different, ways that bad actors are trying to finagle their ways into our pocketbooks and into our inventory shelves. So really looking forward to not only showing you guys some of the stuff that we've been seeing, but hearing from all of you about what you're seeing on your end, because this is an evolving landscape of chicanery, and sometimes that chicanery isn't so fun. So let's take it away.
I guess it's not shenanigans, it's chicanery. That's good. um, Thank you all. We want to start with just a quick hit on the state of fraud in e-commerce, and then we're going to talk about some of the frequent flyers that we see, that I hear about on a daily basis, Vito sees on a daily basis, you all probably deal with on a daily basis as well. So we'll kind of go through some of those, talk about what we're seeing, new kind of emergent trends in these categories, what they're about, and some things that you can kind of take away as insights into how to deal with them, perhaps. All right, so let's kick it off. I think before we actually do this next slide, let's talk about those poll results. We just had a poll up for those of you that joined a little bit late. We just had a poll up on whether the fraud prevention budget is increasing or decreasing this year. So we can see that for a lot of you, there's no change or you're not sure. It's more than, almost 3/4, in fact. 24% of you, very lucky, it's going up. You're increasing, you're getting more resources. And then 8% of you, it's decreasing. So it's really interesting. If you look at kind of no change and decreasing and not sure, that's the majority of you. So moving on kind of to what's happening in the state of e-commerce. I guess we see a lot of data. I mentioned my fire tower by getting to have conversations with merchants. We see a lot of transactions. We see a lot of data. We run a lot of analyses on these data. One of the things that we do is we look at fraud, obviously, the state of fraud at a macro level. Vito, what are these numbers about? What is this telling us?
I wouldn't say that I'm surprised, but it really touches on a raw nerve in so many ways, and that's the game we're all in. Is that bad actors are slippery folks, and they're always evolving, and that's why this is such an iterative process, what we do in trying to put these fires out, because the arsonist is just going to find a new way to ignite the thing they want to ignite. So when I see something like a 50% increase in reshipper fraud pressure, that's an alarm bell right there. So I think that all of these points, but especially that reshipper fraud bit, kind of wave the flag for, hey, we have to have a conversation about this, and we need to really circle the wagons and get to know what's going on for so many different storefronts, because the more we know about the different flavors here, the better we can all prepare ourselves to kind of stop this stuff as it happens.
Yeah. Given the resource and kind of budgeting numbers that we were just talking about, I don't like this. I don't like these numbers. I don't like that they're all going up. I especially don't like that one is up 50%. But I think that to find a kind of silver lining, or to take a glass half full look at this, the good news is that these data match the lived reality that I hear about on a daily basis from merchants. So this is it's providing, I think, probably a little bit of validation to what you all are feeling and what we're hearing. That these criminal organizations are more sophisticated, better armed, and as determined as ever. So as we are continuing to improve our responses and our defenses, they are also stepping up. And a side note here, I've been encouraging everyone that I speak with in the fraud management world to stop using the term fraudster. It sounds so folksy and so hokey when what we're dealing with is sophisticated, well-resourced criminal organizations. And saying fraudster kind of downplays what they are. And let's call it what it is, and that'll help us all kind of address the problem and get more stakeholder buy-in and get people to give it the attention that it deserves. So that's my little soapbox there for a second. Is let's start calling them criminals, man. They're stealing. Let's call them criminals. One other thing as we start to get into this, there's a Q&A button probably, or ask a question. I'm not sure what it's labeled in the interface there. We're going to be fielding questions as they come in. We're going to have a section at the end where we're going to directly answer some of the ones we weren't able to get to in line. But as much as possible, as these things come to you, just submit questions and we will address them when we can. All right. So let's talk about this first thing. This is, in terms of things that we hear about, this is probably the thing I hear about most often when I talk with merchants. Everyone is dealing with some version of this. And we've heard it referred to as address morphing, address fuzzying, address tumbling. We use kind of the overall category bucket term of address manipulation. And it's interesting because we talk a lot about MOs. This is more of a tactic that supports MOs. Vito, what is this and why do criminals engage in this behavior?
I'll tell you one thing. It's something that raises my blood pressure a little bit, that's for sure. There's a lot of different reasons this is done. And believe it or not, some of them don't get into the realm of nefarious activity, but a lot of it does. So what we're going to look at today are a bunch of different variations on the theme here. And you'll see some that are, overwhelmingly bad, and some where it's like a once bitten, twice shy kind of deal, to quote Great White over there. It's a little bit of a once bitten, twice shy. So here's a little bit of a once bitten, twice shy kind of deal. Address tumbling. And Caleb just brought up the Q&A bit. I'll even subvert the theme a little bit. Feel free to just toss out like, yeah, I've seen this before, because you'll be assuaging my fears and helping me out a little bit to get some good night's sleep. Here's an instance of address tumbling that I've seen recently. This address is in Paterson, New Jersey. You can see this inclusion between chestnut and backdoor of, periods, slashes, all sorts of grammatic artwork, you might say. But what's happening here is the individual who's behind this, or individuals who are behind this, are trying to get around very basic frequency checks or very basic deny listing for specific addresses. Perhaps this address was involved in legitimate fraudulent is kind of weird thing, actual fraudulent transactions from the past, and now they want to go back there, which is something we would raise alarm bells at. But maybe this is somebody who's trying to take advantage of a sale and wants to get 5 or 10 of the same item in the same day, and they kind of suspect that there's going to be a velocity check on the delivery address that they use. By doing something like this, where they're tumbling the address, they're effectively creating unique addresses that are pointing to the same real address in real time. So, you could also see that for us humans, when we look at these addresses, we can tell it's 26 Chestnut and Patterson, but, a basic kind of computer system will see this as a unique address each time. So that's the first kind of element here. And if we go to the next slide, I think it's going to really raise some hairs on the back of your neck, and I'd love to hear it, and I'm almost positive it would. This is the biggest freight forwarder in America. This is USZCN.com, the USZCN freight forwarding warehouse here. And orders that are sent here are then forwarded to addresses in China. We see a lot of buyers using this address, and a lot of them are once bitten, twice shy, and they're going to do things that get them around what they fear would be deny listing on the merchant's end. So here's the first kind of thing they'll do. And again, please shout out if you've seen this before. I'm sure you have. The first element in this sort of address manipulation is going to be the inclusion of a buyer code. You can see we've bolded them all here on the right. It's a letter number string that looks kind of alien to us. It might raise the WTF flag a little bit, but this string of letters and numbers is going to point to a buyer that the freight forwarder is aware of. Obviously, they're not going to include the name of the buyer in the delivery address, but by including this code, that's going to fulfill the logistics chain to say, hey, this is supposed to go to so-and-so, and we know that. But this gets a little bit, hairier, and you could probably see that already. Look at all the anomalous punctuation here, the inclusion of commas, if you look at the very bottom one, there's that Herverjernum kind of string before the 6215. All of this is being done, as I mentioned earlier, with the tumbling to bypass those simple checks on frequency, on velocity, and to also, go around a sort of elementary deny listing. Let's say you or the merchant in question has decided that they don't want to do business with this reshipper. Well, here's what I'm going to do if I'm trying to get to that reshipper, and I might be able to break your deny listing in doing that. So that's what we see here for the biggest freight forwarder in America. There's plenty more like them. We also see this. This is interesting, and this is a newer kind of tactic. The addresses that were deny listed or wanted to be stopped by the merchant involved here were at 606 and 707 Carson Drive. So the bad actors got hip to this and they said, you know what? There is no building at 604 or 708 Carson Drive, but the shipping company will know that, hey, this is the only thing in town. Let's get it to that address. So I'm going to manipulate the address based on proximity to the real address in order to get my package to the intended destination. And shippers are more than happy to say, hey, we get that you made a little bit of a mistake there. We're going to bring it to the address that we know is real. So even if you look in that rightmost column at the very bottom, 604 Carson Drive, you can see that APDS inclusion there, which is likely another one of those buyer codes that we just pointed out earlier. It could also be a kind of gibberish string to get around that sort of deny listing and all that kind of stuff. So these are just very emergent, but also kind of simplified for the sake of time here, variations on address manipulation that we've seen lately.
And those are, the interesting thing about that with several of these is that it's really relying on human error correction, right? The FedEx delivery person, the UPS delivery person, they're going to look at that and they're going to figure out, they're going to disambiguate what that address is supposed to be, where it's supposed to go, and they're going to do their job. They're going to get it there. And so the criminals are taking advantage of that and using that to their advantage here. We have an interesting question that came in, which is, Vito, you and I have talked a little bit about, and I think we may cover this, but there are front end tools that help you standardize an address. We've all been in that thing where you're buying something and it says, you start typing your address and it says, did you mean this address, right? And then you select your address. That's address standardization. And then there are tools on the back end. There are ways that you can try to normalize the address. And the question that someone just asked is, are there third-party services that help normalize these addresses? I suspect that there are. We have built our own features for that. So we don't use a third party for that, but there probably are. It's a really good question. And I think it speaks to the user experience side. That address standardization creates a little bit of friction in the buying process. Someone has to select the address, and if it's not quite right, and they have to kind of think about it and look at it, it's not that big a deal, but it is a step. The normalization happens on the back end and is frictionless. So that's kind of nice. Um, there was, hold on, there's another one that came in here that I think is interesting. Have you seen address manipulation used in instances of collusion fraud? Um, I can speak really briefly to collusion fraud and then hand it over to you to answer, Vito, if that works for you.
Of course, yeah, I got a lot to say.
Cool, yeah, I'm sure. So collusion fraud, for those of you that don't deal with this, it's specific to business models where you have drop shipping is a good example. So I own a store. I'm the merchant of record. Orders come in. I kind of pass them along to a third party that ships them directly to the end customer. Right? You could have instances of collusion in that scenario where you have a bad actor who's placing the order in concert with the seller, and that they place that order, the funds go to that person, nothing is ever shipped. They're using a stolen card, perhaps, to do this. Another version is marketplaces. Similar scenario, you have a seller who's working in collusion with a fake buyer. So, Vito, I guess the question is address manipulation part of collusion fraud?
Oh, big time. Some of your more obvious or more head scratching instances of address manipulation are going to be related to collusion fraud. We've even seen with food delivery services, the use of a tilde or the use of someone saying ship to, or the address having the word address in it. That's kind of a flag for these bad actors to say, don't take this off the shelf, or don't make the pizza, or whatever, because I'm going to use this order to, funnel money back to me and do something nefarious there. So yeah, absolutely. If there's a drop shipping or seller element here, we've used those flags, those tags, so to speak, to surface fraudulent individuals in the middle of the chain. And those insights have been very valuable for both for ourselves and for the merchants we work with to flag things on their end.
It's a great question, and interesting topic. Um, that's great. So let's. Are we good to move along here? I guess, Vito, let me ask an intentionally provocative question here. So what? People are manipulating addresses. Who cares? Why people are hacking the regex and they're hacking the FedEx, right? What does it matter?
There's a couple of things you have to ask yourself. It's not a one. There's no answer for everybody, but I think these are the three kind of touch points that everyone can get around here. Are they trying, as we talked about earlier, to take advantage of sales or take advantage of a hot item that's being highlighted this week and just get their hands on a lot of it and potentially sell these down the line on their own storefronts, or just kind of collect a lot of your SKUs, which you might want. You might be happy when a sale comes around to give 15 of the same item to the same person. So you have to ask yourself that question. Number two is something we've talked about a lot with a lot of our merchants. Are we trying to open, business ventures in APAC? Are we trying to open business ventures in EMEA or any of these other emerging regions? And we're seeing buyers saturating those unopened markets through use of resellers, which we'll talk about in a second. But do I want to control that? Am I worried about my items going to Southeast Asia or going to Brazil, where I'm trying to open a storefront, and then, of course, kind of being sold at less than I would expect, et cetera. So we're worried about sort of market flooding through use of reshippers. And then number three, which is, I'm sure all of us here can relate to, is it just weird? And I don't know what's going on, which is in our game, especially in the economic times we live in, how much weirdness can we really take on? And anything to clear the weird cobwebs out of our head will help us make those kind of decisions. So I think those are the big three reasons as to why we'd be concerned with this kind of manipulation. And as we'll see here in a few seconds, not all of it is bad, as we kind of alluded to.
That's a really good point around do things just look weird, which is Maybe, you don't know why, you don't know what is happening, you don't know what the MO is, but something doesn't feel right, and for people who have been working in fraud management for a long time, they trust that gut feel, and they're going to, try to manage that from there. Yeah, let's next up, good segue there, which is, so address manipulation is commonly used to obfuscate the fact that something is going to a reshipper, right? This is a really, really common use case. And it's something that we hear quite a lot about. It was a key part of last Crimes and Cocktails. We talked about the Southeast Asian fraud ring. That is a key part of that whole scheme. But let's go specifically. Let's go deep into reshippers.
For sure. For sure. So we could break it down into like two categories here. The first are these enterprise operations. They're big time. They do big money. They've got multiple locations domestically, and they've got multiple destinations across the world. You've probably seen these addresses before. These are like our top two, I would say, or they're at least on the Mount Rushmore of like the enterprise operation freight forwarders that we see all day. The second one's a little more interesting. And this is kind of the head scratcher that you might be like, well, this is weird. I was working with a merchant not long ago, and we saw a lot of orders going to this address. Lo and behold, our friends at Google Maps here caught this guy, in the act. And believe it or not, this is safe stuff. This is a cottage industry reseller, reshipper, who's freight forwarding to Vietnam, and their track record was immaculate. They've engaged in no fraud. There were no chargebacks associated to this address. And as you can see here, this individual has contacts, is fulfilling everything that they're being asked to fulfill. There's no use of stolen credit cards, but it's happening out of this individual's garage. So, there's no operation too big or too small. And that goes to something else here. If we look on this next slide, this might come as a shock to you, but since 2020, we've seen almost $2 billion in sales to addresses that we know to be reshippers, and that's both the enterprise and the cottage industry mom and pop type freight forwarders. And less than 1% of them, 84 bips, have come back with chargebacks. So if we're just blanket denying orders that are going to reshippers, we're obviously leaving a lot of money on the table. As we alluded to earlier, there's real business reasons, real business concerns about why you might not want to do business with freight forwarders. We talked about the emerging markets. We talked about protecting inventory and all that. But we don't advise, nor should you even embark upon kind of a holistic deny listing of these addresses for the reason you see here. There's just a lot of money on the table, and a lot of the overwhelming majority of it is good money. When do we stop, and why do we stop? There's a little more color on that coming up right here.
I think the key thing there is that there's kind of a selection bias, though. If you see that a lot of your chargebacks are items that are being shipped to these reshippers, you could really easily bias yourself into thinking that these guys are bad. They're all bad. If you don't look at the flip side of orders that are going there that are not fraudulent.
Yeah, and to add to that, Caleb, sometimes if you simply Google these addresses, you'll see forum postings of people who've been bitten, and they say, this is a fraud address. You want to stay away from this. The data doesn't really back that up on our end. However, as we'll talk about here, there's different profiling that we can use that go beyond just the simple fact that this is a reshipper, and those, I think, are the best practices for this realm.
That's right, because like you said, the fact that it's largely not fraudulent doesn't mean that your specific business doesn't want to stop it, right?
Absolutely.
So this is, we talked a little bit about standardization and normalization, and those are two methods that exist, right? So you've got the ability to, standardize that on the front end, and then that is, again, it's visible to the user, right? It's another step that they have to take in that checkout flow. And your UX, your product people, your e-commerce people, they're doing a lot of work every day to try to streamline those flows. Sometimes I'm sure you've had arguments with them where they want to store the payment method and they don't want to check CVV ever, right? Like that's an example of the kind of place where we see fraud management and user experience being at odds with each other. This might be another one where that act of doing client side standardization of the address might be a fight that you get into versus normalization on the back end. Do you want to talk about normalization a little bit, Vito? I think it's an interesting topic.
For sure. We brought up the fact that I think a question was raised earlier. Is there something that can handle this, like a third-party tool? From my experience on the front lines, there are things that can like scratch that itch, but if you're really looking for calamine lotion, so to speak, like you're going to need to develop something a little bit more robust than that, because it doesn't just come down to the normalization. And to get you up to speed on it, normalization is going to happen on the back end. I'm going to give you that Patterson-based address with all the funky business in the middle of it, and then I'm going to whittle it down to what I believe to be the real address. How much is whittled down? What is being pulled out of there in the act of normalizing? Those are the questions that, your data science team and your engineers would want to give you insights on in order to make a more robust decision. It's something that the buyer will never be aware of. It's something that should produce a pretty low latency in terms of decision timing. It just is something that requires a little bit of a powwow strategically. It's not just a simple, one-stop shop. Again, there's profiling to be done here, and how much is being whittled away through normalization, what's being whittled away through normalization. Those are the sort of questions that need to be asked.
We have a question in the chat, or we've had a few versions of this, and it's does Signifyd catch address manipulation and proximity manipulation, those kinds of things. Vito, I don't know if you want to, how much we can say, or how much exactly we can say about that, but do you want to answer that broadly?
For sure. We have a model dedicated to address manipulation. Almost every order that comes through is scored for how much, manipulation has been done to it. And then we use that signal in conjunction with other signals to decide whether or not we're approving or denying it. As we've mentioned, there's overwhelming positivity even when the address is manipulated. However, through the kind of conversations that we have merchant by merchant, some storefronts are a little less little less risk averse, especially for specific SKUs, to deal with this. So we will set up profiling based on those SKUs, based on those parameters to stop orders that are highly manipulated for specific SKUs, or we will approve orders for non high risk SKUs that have those kind of manipulation flags to them. And we generally see the levels of success that we've already pointed out. So yeah, I think it's a merchant by merchant, SKU by SKU kind of thing, and it lends to something we'll talk about a lot today, like the importance of those conversations cross team and from merchant to provider.
It's interesting because the second part of that question was around proximity, and that's a really interesting one because that's generally for obfuscating a reshipper. Do you want to talk about this a little bit?
For sure. I think one of the most consequential and impactful things you can do on your end is to develop a sort of tagging system or a sort of inventory of reshippers. So you can track performance. There's going to be, higher risk ones, all surface through this activity. This activity we call geofencing, right? So if there's an address that comes through that is normalized and we can tell it's a reshipper, we're going to consider a couple of things, right? How similar is it to either a deny listed address or like a known reshipper address, right? Or how similar is it to an address that has high frequency in your database? And then once we've developed that tag, we can make decisioning logic based on distance to that address, right? So we've done the normalization. We can see this new address is within, a tenth of a mile from the quote unquote bad address. That's going to stop things like the proximity manipulation we saw earlier. In fact, that's how a lot of the proximity manipulation was stopped on our end. We know that 607 Main Street is not real, but 606 is. 607 Main Street is, less than a tenth of a mile from this bad address. Therefore, let's put enhanced eyes. Let's put a worse score. Let's really, put a red flag around this. And if it contains anything else that's unsavory, well, this thing's out. We're not taking any risk on this. But if there's an address that comes up and it's similar but very far away, we might say, hey, this might be a false positive. Let's approve this and monitor and see what happens. So I'd highly recommend on your end to begin thinking this way, because if we just flat out put a simple address into a deny listing kind of scenario, we're then inviting more address manipulation from predominantly good actors, and we're kind of kneecapping ourselves from knowing what's going on. We're not building out like a robust sort of segmentation that we could then address after things have earned out 3 months down the line and say, hey, look, well, this address actually did well over the last 3 months. This address is actually kind of bad. So let's retool and continue iterating on what we're stopping and what we're letting through.
So we are able to then, using that, you're able to create that flag, right? Is reshipper, is not reshipper. What do you do with that flag once you have it? How do you use that signal?
Yeah, that signal needs to be in conjunction with things like this. Am I shipping to a address that is a likely reshipper and targeting specific SKUs that to be, high fraud items? Am I operating at significant velocity, same day on the same email, same day on the same card, same day on the same address, et cetera? Do certain payment types have higher chargeback rates, higher gross loss rates, and then are also going to this potential reshipper? User categories are something that you should absolutely consider in conjunction with the reshipper tag, right? Perhaps I have a subscription model and my subscribers are generally low risk, but people who are coming through out of the subscription bucket or on guest checkout, they're maybe higher risk. So I might want to take a little more, I might not want to take so much risk on those people. And then you combine all of these, right? There's no hurt in adding all these signals together, especially when you circle your own internal wagons and say, where is the fraud? Like where's the bleeding coming from? It's going to be tiered like this in conjunction with that yes, no. Maybe something with like no reshipper, not targeting a specific SKU, not operating a velocity on a subscriber or aged merchant account is your safest SKU or your safest group. Then you'll see you have an approval rate that's in the 90s. Maybe we could jack that approval rate up a little bit, and vice versa. Maybe you have too high of an approval rate on something that's yielding a yes or yielding like a high value for these types of signals. We might want to bring that approval rate down a little bit.
It's interesting because we're kind of pushing over into some of the areas of policy abuse, some of the areas of where businesses want to control things for non-fraud reasons. We work with a retailer that sells footwear, sneakers especially, and some of the other footwear categories are prone to fraud and abuse patterns. And they had an overseas reshipper that was reselling their goods overseas. And they took a look at it and they said, you know what, we don't really care for the most part. But these SKUs, we want to keep them from doing that because of, conflict with other partners that, this person sells through. They're going to get mad at us. This company's going to get mad at us if we allow these to be resold. So we're going to block that. And then also they decided, the resellers that are using these reshippers, they don't get loyalty points. They don't get to benefit from our loyalty program. And so they were able to use it that way. So it's interesting because this signal, this flag, helps you enforce business policies as well as prevent fraud that's involved with reshippers. Before we move on to the next topic, we got a really great question from Crystal, which is around geofencing, but the question was around orders being delivered to apartment buildings, but that don't contain unit numbers in the shipping address. And the MO there is that the fraudster can have something shipped to, if they know the billing address, they can have it shipped to that billing address and then just pick it up in the lobby when it gets there. And then all the signals match. Do you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, seen it, been bit by it. All right. Uh,
Yep.
Here's again when we talk about normalization, right? Um, I mentioned earlier that it's about what's being normalized, what's being taken out, what's not there to begin with, or what's there and then being extracted. You can then create a logic that says is apartment but doesn't possess this number string. That's
That's
now
right.
a higher risk profile for you. And I'm positive that I'm positive because I've done it in conjunction with these other signals, right? Specific SKUs, specific velocity types, how many credit cards are associated with that email address, how many devices are associated with that email address, et cetera, and vice versa. How many email addresses are on that device? We could talk hours about all the permutations here, but adding the flag of is apartment but doesn't have apartment number in conjunction with those can really elicit a greater understanding of the problem for you. So
Yeah.
my short answer there is pursue that, but pursue it in conjunction to these non-address signals like velocity, like SKU type, et cetera, like buyer type. And you will then have a business insight that is not only valuable to your anti-fraud protection, but valuable to your marketing team, valuable to your product team, et cetera. And that can help tremendously.
That's great. Now, moving on, one of the other things that, in terms of a tactic, and it's not necessarily an MO, but a tactic, is account takeover. We're hearing more and more about this. I could cite statistics that it's a growing concern for everyone across the space. And what's interesting about it is that ATO is a term that we use, and we treat it as a thing when really it's a huge bucket, and there are a lot of different MOs and even different flavors of account takeover that we all in fraud management need to be concerned about, and lots of business problems that occur downstream of this. Um, Vito, let's get into account takeover, man. It's a hairy topic.
Oh man, yeah. I'm going to show you guys a graphic image here. This might gross you out. Here it is. Uh, ATO, as I like to say, it's a two-way street. We're on that road together. There's a lot of pavement on your end, though. There's a lot of stuff that happens internally that can kind of highlight this. Here's two JSON blobs, and if we look at the first one, we're going to see, you know, a lot of the grossness in action, right? This is all around account information. We could see this account was created back in 2010 in December. We got null values for the last order ID, but we have aggregate order count and spend, lifetime order count, which helps develop a profile of a trusted buyer, et cetera. But look at the next few items there, which should raise alarm bells for you. Um, the email, the last update date on this account was in 2016. What that entails is a little bit blurry from our end, right? It's did they change delivery address? Did they change, their phone number, et cetera? Without being past that, we don't see it explicitly. The password was changed back in 2010 on the day and exact time that the account was made. So the password hasn't been changed in a very long time. And the email was last updated when the account was made. You're all familiar with the space long enough to know that's a red flag right there. Similarly, at the very bottom here, you have an account created in 2011. The password was updated in December of that year, whereas the account was made in April of that year. But we haven't seen any sort of password being updated in a very, very long time. What does that say to us? It should come as no surprise to you. These accounts are ripe for takeover. These accounts are just waiting to be compromised. All of us here, our information is open to the public, so to speak, just by virtue of the digital world we live in. And the average individual does not practice proper account hygiene in terms of having multiple different passwords for their accounts. So, I can be compromised on website X and then come to yours, and I just happen to be using the same password for your website. And now that bad actor has plugged that in, gotten access to my account, and they're doing a couple of things to it. And we'll talk about that now. But this really speaks to the need to have company policy around password update, around dormant account policies, when and if we wipe accounts that haven't been accessed for, X period of time. And to get on my soapbox very briefly, I think we're in an era where your user is not as adverse to updating their stuff as we like to think. They're privacy conscious individuals. That's growing in this world nowadays, especially after COVID. People are a little more aware of how important it is to make sure their things are protected. So I highly recommend this, because these two accounts right here were taken over. But in order to stop that from happening, you definitely want to talk across your organization about the need to have policies regarding accounts that have been inactive for long periods of time, and really define what that period of time is, really define what dormancy entails, and go from there.
Yeah, let's. In a minute, we're going to talk about some strategies and some struggles there. Let's think about, like, so this is kind of an example here. What are bad actors doing with it? What are these criminal organizations doing with ATO, or what is it? I guess.
For sure. So there's multiple flavors. They're all disgusting, right? And these scenarios, again, you can really extrapolate out of these. This is your 15,000-foot view at these scenarios. The first is the most obvious, right? I'm going to get into accounts that have payment instruments associated with them, and I'm going to buy your most expensive, most sought after stuff using that payment instrument because it's free, right? For me, right? And then by time it gets reported, well, I've got the thing. The second one is like a Trojan horse kind of scheme, right? Where I'm going to get into accounts that may or may not have payment instruments associated with them, and I'm going to use payment instruments from my arsenal of stolen credit cards, et cetera, because I'm going to take advantage of a aged account on your end. Like, we know that we might be flagging buyers who have just created their account or who are operating on a guest account. Criminals believe, rightfully so, that if they use an account that's been around for some time, they might have better success at doing what they have to do. And in conjunction with that, something we'll talk about a little bit later, they might engage in card testing just by doing that, which is what we'll talk about later. Finally, I might get into these compromised accounts and do nothing. I might add it to my spreadsheet as a criminal, say, hey, here's all the accounts I have control over. Here's how many of them have payment instruments associated with them. And I'm not going to do anything right now, but I'm going to sell this list down the line because this list is enriched, curated, and these are guaranteed honey pits for whoever's going to want to do something with them down the line. So those three flavors are really most common.
Which is, I think the interesting piece there is that you have the point at which the account is being compromised, and then you have things that are happening downstream. These three different versions are going to have three very different patterns that happen after the account is first accessed by that unauthorized party, right? And so I think, kind of cutting forward into that, it's the question of, where is the damage? Where is the damage being done after the account is compromised? Because ATO, we talk about ATO, it's the act of taking over that account. But then what, right? That's the piece. The then what is the piece you actually really care about, right? So, do you want to talk about this a little bit, Vito, in terms of these points of damage?
For sure. If we work backwards too, like that value transfer could be something as that might not seem so nefarious to us, but has repercussions down the line. Like I'm gonna take all the loyalty points off of hundreds and hundreds of accounts and put them into one big account and then compromise from there. The downstream element is going to be like we talked about a little bit earlier, where we might not do things right now, but I'm going to curate a list of accounts and then in 2, 3 years time, even someone bigger than me is going to come in, pay me through cryptocurrency, maybe for all of my digging, and then, have some sort of, large scale attack on your website and your storefront using these accounts. Finally, that point of purchase element is what we just talked about earlier. You have a stored payment instrument. I'm going to then make a purchase using that stored payment instrument. By the time the chargeback comes back, I've already received those goods. So those are the different angles you can take
Yeah.
on this.
I think what's important is that these are three of them, right? This isn't an exhaustive list. We talk with pharmacies, for example, where accounts are taken over, and the threat there is that someone goes in and they look to see who has prescriptions for narcotics or controlled substances, and they use the information that's in there to create a social engineering attack. They find a way to get the rest of the person's information, figure out how to place orders on that prescription, and then go in and pick it up and sell those drugs. Um, those are so it's and that's just an example. So I think the important piece here is that this is sort of the way that companies that are doing this right, the ones we speak to who are really getting their arms around this, and this has become our sort of best practice recommendation, is it's not just about, don't just think about perimeter defense, don't just think about stopping that account from being taken over, right? Really diagnose where the damage is, what is being done after that account is taken over, dig into it, understanding what those criminals are doing with those accounts after they take them over helps you make sure that your response to that and your defense against it is appropriate. And then, from there, connect with internal stakeholders who really care about this, right? And this is, be as fraud management, you need to be that connective tissue within your organization. You need to talk to, obviously, security cares, right? But who else cares about this? Payments, they have a reason to care. Um, E-commerce and user experience, right? They care. IT, they care. So all of these groups, not only do they all care, they all have a different perspective. They all have a different ability to shape the organization's understanding and response here, right? So that's the goal, is if you can come with intelligence on here's what's happening, here's where these accounts are being sold, here's how people are leveraging these accounts for nefarious purposes, it enables you to have that conversation. Because what's going to happen is at some point, you're going to have to make a decision about where to introduce friction. That's going to bounce up to the e-commerce team and the product team, the digital team, whoever it is that controls customer experience. It's going to end up with them. If you haven't brought them along that ride the whole way, it's going to be you arguing with them about, you need to put this in. And it's going to be a tough conversation. Whereas if you bring them in as partners on this and they understand what this is, why it is, it's going to be an easier conversation to have. I think that's our biggest piece of advice there.
Absolutely. When you talk about product, I mean, this next bit is right up product's alley, I think. So
It really is. As we kind of go one click down. So one of the things that we talked about was taken over accounts can be used to be sort of a verified synthetic account, if you think about it that way, right? So synthetic accounts are, you use a bot to spin up a bunch of fake accounts with fake addresses. They're not tied to an actual person. It's more and more companies are putting in defenses against new unaged accounts where you don't have a purchase history. Those kinds of accounts are seen as inherently suspicious. And whether or not that's valid, but that is it's a flag. Criminal organizations are using those ATO accounts to kind of be that proxy. One of the things people are doing with this is card testing, right? But this is still, I would say still, and Vito, correct me if I'm wrong here, I think synthetic accounts are probably still the majority vector for card testing. Is that the case?
big time, and you'll see why right here.
Yeah.
This is a example where a crime ring was taking advantage of charity donations. A great humanitarian thing to have, right? Really nice, but you can see the velocity at which these individuals moved, multiple orders a day for these $1 transactions going to the charity involved. If we go ahead one slide, it's really going to highlight that synthetic account element here. If you take a look at that account email column, you can see what looks to be spam, right? But notice that they're not using Gmail or Yahoo or any of these like freely available, easy to use servers. what they're using is this ancd.us, a private domain. By spinning up all of these synthetic accounts in order to do this, now they've developed a repertoire, a repository of tons of real accounts, aged accounts, that then they can come back to after they've done their card testing, and maybe they get their hands on stolen credit cards in 6 months or a year or 5 years. Now they can just run them through those compromised accounts that are aged, and they can then bypass some of those early checks that we talked about earlier. Those checks of, is this an aged account or not? Is this a subscriber, et cetera? Like these are now aged accounts that they're going to be operating through. So it's more than just the fact that they've put all of these $1 donations through. It's more than just the fact that authorization was done on these, which is a cost to y'all, but they've created like a sleeper cell of bad accounts that can then be compromised or then be used to take advantage of compromised credentials down the line.
We're running tight on time. I want to make sure we tie a bow on this. I think the important thing is, what do you do about this, right? Like a couple key things here. That API endpoint protection. Often, criminal organizations are using your user interface to do this card testing. Sometimes, if you have an API endpoint that is not protected, that interface calls, they see that and they just build a script that hits that endpoint, right? This is where you work with the product team, as you referenced, like make sure those things are locked down. Tar pitting is a really interesting one, that concept from cybersecurity. So instead of giving an obvious signal and stopping the bad action, making sure that they can't transact, you're giving them a signal that they've gotten busted. Instead, provide them false answers, consume their resources, give the answers slower and slower and slower the more transactions they send, and you ruin the economics of you as a target. Similar, false flag signals. If you provide fake answers, approve 98% of the cards that they test and decline 2 randomly, but don't actually send them for authorization, it's brilliant. And then, product proofing, build those checks, stop the people from being able to access those things, right?
Absolutely. Your fraud team is super valuable here just to be, trying to break things, right? We found out that these criminals who were trying to card test, what they were doing was creating a cart with real items in that cart. They'd have to add the donation at the end of all this, but then they'd remove the big item from the cart just to be left with a single item in the cart that was the donation, which you weren't supposed to be able to do, but you could do. So little things like that can go a long way.
Yeah, that's right. And this is the case where, as the fraud management team, one of my favorite things about working with Vito is I joke that he's a white hat criminal, right? Being able to think like these criminals and walk through your purchase flow and see where the holes are. You see it. The product team does not. They don't think this way for the most part, right? Your e-commerce team, your digital team, they're not going to think this way. And things like, we just had someone submit a note here that some processes don't even require an account to submit an authorization, right? Yeah, those are the kinds of things where you've got to have that conversation with your product team of, yeah, you're trying to reduce customer friction and make these things easier, but at what cost, right? Is the juice worth the squeeze? This is a space that you, as the fraud management personas, are uniquely positioned to have this conversation. So use your voice, do those things. We are always happy to bring our voice to the room as well. This is one of the things that we do a lot with, is fraud management teams will reach out to us and say, hey, we have this problem. We can't get anyone to listen. Can you help us? And we're very happy to do so. We have some amazing experts in the space and a ton of data. We can come into the room, or we can arm you better as you walk into that room. So we had a space reserved here for Q&A. We were supposed to end at the 50-minute. We're at 4 minutes over. We've been doing our best to answer these things as in line as possible. We will try to follow up. Anything we didn't answer, we'll try to follow up afterwards with you on. And I think, lastly, thank you all. Thank you for attending. Great turnout today. Hope this was helpful. Hope this was entertaining, engaging, and mostly useful. We're going to be sending you a cocktail kit as a thank you. Let us know if you like it. Hope you do. And hope to see you next time. So thank you all for joining.